Okay, welcome everybody to the location webinar from the Farmers Market Support Program of Community Farm Alliance. Today we're going to be talking about some of the tools that are available to everybody to kind of determine some of the best case scenarios, best options for developing a plan to relocate or start a new market or anywhere in between. The Farmers Market Support Program is a project of Community Farm Alliance. Hang on, let's see if I can. And, sorry everybody. Okay, it's a project of Community Farm Alliance. What we do is work with farmers markets in Kentucky to develop capacity, to build out capacity for markets, and we offer a couple of programs for that: the Kentucky Double Dollars program, the Market Manager Cost Share program, and technical assistance. This element of this webinar is sort of an element of technical assistance. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today in the webinar are available in the Farmers Market Toolkit. In fact, we will revisit this towards the end of the webinar. So, but mainly here in stage 1B, choosing a market site. So we'll talk about some of the stuff that's there and some of the additional tools that I've created in the handouts. Also, if you are on the webinar right now, there are handouts available. You should be able to download all 5 items. They are the presentation itself, which has a lot of the links that we'll be talking about, as well as some of the documents that I'll be referring to during the presentation as well. Okay, so let's get back to our slideshow. Okay, so we're going to talk about more or less. We're going to talk about what it takes to. We're going to address what it is that markets need to either relocate or start fresh. And there are a couple of different conditions here. So, but the most important thing to get started is to really have a good understanding of what you really need, and what you really need, what's sort of nice to have, and some of the reasons why you need to move or are starting a new location. So really kind of starting out from a really big high elevation of we have to have X amount of space, X amount of, we need bathrooms, we need this kind of shelter or shade, or et cetera. Those are the things that you really need to know, because ultimately what you want to do is upgrade from whatever you have, right? And that's not always possible, but in this case, in this scenario, that's what we're looking for in an improvement, if we can get it, right? So we're going to talk about creating a scorecard. A lot of this was sourced from the Farmers Market Coalition report that is attached in the handouts. It is a 68-page report, so it is thorough, and it is written by a civic engineer. So you know, it can be a little dense, but it is also really interesting. The report itself is focused on Seattle, so take that with a grain of salt. We are in Kentucky. We don't have any cities as large as Seattle here, and we don't have the same kind of residential density. So, you know, some of what he writes in the report, you can probably stretch out a little bit as far as sort of how far people are willing to travel, especially. But he also created a scorecard, which is really cohesive, and probably overkill for what we're looking at, especially today in a 1-hour webinar. So I made a simplified version that we'll talk about a little bit at the end as well. So we're going to talk about a couple of main criteria, and these are the things that you really want to know before you want to get the information for when you're considering a new location. So first of all, you really need to know what your minimum size of the market needs to be. Like this is the minimum minimum size for the market to succeed, or to make sure that your customers, your farmers, or everyone is happy. Depending on, those are the two kind of factors. But you need to understand what that is, and we'll go over that. Utility requirements, electrical, water, bathrooms, etc., transportation access, traffic, the value of the things that are in the proximity of the market, residential density, visibility, and sun. And we'll address all these things individually. So minimum size. There's, it's not a lot to this. You really, like, how big your market is, how many booths you need. But you also need to kind of think about the dimensions of it. So the tents plus how big the shopping lanes need to be. If you're in, say, if you're relocating to, say, a road closure space, you may need to consider emergency vehicle access. I have seen the fire department in a market flex and drive their fire engine through the market to prove whether or not it is wide enough. So, make sure that you have that consideration if you're going to do a road closure, or if you're near buildings that need emergency access. So those are the kind of things you'll need to kind of calculate and get an idea of what the ideal dimensions are. And this is another place where you can kind of play with the shape of the market. So if you can do, single row, double row, a sort of a box with a center, where you can, where people are sort of taking laps in the market. So just kind of, there are lots of ways to make a new market space interesting. So one of the tools we're going to talk about first is a very simple tool you can even use on Google Group or on Google Maps. Today we're going to be using Covington as an example because I know that they are looking down the barrel of a move soon. So I'm using them to kind of show some of the basic tools that you can use, so we can kind of have like a cohesive look at some of the tools and how to use them. So the first one we're going to talk about, the market itself is located right here on 3rd Street, between where these two roads sort of filter through. So it runs the length of these two spaces, but the bulk of the market is kind of located between these two roads. But if you right-click on a location, actually you want to click on a location, say right there, and then you want to right-click, measure distance. Your next click will actually pop up a distance measurement, and you can drag and drop so you can see how big a space is. So if you wanted to examine a new location, let's say the market is going to relocate to Court Street and you need to know how big it is. Before you can save yourself a trip to get a pretty loose estimate. So it is 207 feet from corner to corner. So you can get, you potentially could get to 20 tenths right up against each other along this on one side. So this market, so if this block was the size of the new location, you could get 40 tenths in there. I know that wouldn't necessarily work in this for Covington because this is an important street with the Kenton County Clerk's office and all that stuff, but it's just a proof of concept. So that's a nice tool worth taking a look at. I've given you a couple of instructions here, but it's a helpful way to kind of sort out some of the dimensions. You want to, so the other thing, next thing you want to really consider are, when you're considering a new location, is are there bathrooms available? If not, do you think are there any nearby businesses that you could work out an arrangement with for bathrooms? They're pretty important to make sure that you need bathroom access, bottom line. To have a happy customer experience, I can't imagine anything more frustrating than not being able to use being in a market and running into a bathroom need and not being able to deal with that at the market. You may have vendors who need electrical access, so you want to think about that. They may be really important to the market. And is there a place that you could put up permanent signage? That's a really helpful thing to have as well. Again, emergency vehicle access. And then, another thing you want to think about are there safety measures in place for pedestrians in the area? Especially with road closures, will you need ways to block the street when you're doing when you're considering utilities? Next thing you need to consider is transportation access. For the most part, most of the areas in Kentucky, car parking is essential. You need to have a decent plan in place to make sure that there are enough parking spaces for the kind of customers that you want to come to the market. But that's not necessarily free parking. There is metered parking, there's parking garage, but those are less attractive options for when somebody's considering which market to go to. I would suggest trying to come up with a plan for the ADA compliance. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act. Essentially, what I've done in markets in the past is printed out and laminated a handicap sign and sort of created a handicap spot next to the market, with limited success as far as people paying attention. But I think people appreciate it when it's there, and it's a good thing to kind of stay ahead of. Other things to look for are bike parking and public transit access. Not everybody who wants to come to the market will necessarily have a car or choose to go take their car to the market. So make sure that you have options, places that people can lock up their bikes, or ideally you're close to a bus stop or another form of public transit. So next thing you want to consider is sort of adjacent traffic, both in the vehicle form and foot traffic. Vehicular traffic, there's a lot of ways to find. There's a really nice way to find some helpful information, especially around busy streets. You can get an idea of how many cars go through a street. Average annual daily traffic is the statistic you want to keep an eye out for, and I'll show you that in a second. But you also want to consider if this is an area where there will be decent foot traffic. There are people who do enjoy sort of walking into a place. Some people prefer walking to a market. So sidewalks, access to sidewalks is nice as well. And an easy way to figure out if there are decent numbers there is just to bring a chair and a clicker and take a few hours during the proposed market hours. Take a look and use that as a statistic for your market as you're considering new locations. So the next piece, so I wanted to show you this awesome tool the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet has. It's an interactive traffic data map, which is not on the screen. We'll pop it up. So it's the whole, this is a big file, so it takes some time to kind of go through it all. But if we were to zoom in to Covington, let the resolution sort out. I want to explain some of the things that you see on the map here. The main thing that you want to look for, because it's a lot of data and some of it's super confusing, but the main thing you want to look for are these specific numbers here. So 3,747 is the annual average daily traffic estimates for this spot on this orange dot that were measured in 2016. So, and you can zoom in on this information. You can go to road info. If you click this road info icon, it just looks like a road, and you click right onto that piece. You'll have all sorts of information that's really not necessary for us, but what you're looking for is this data point, AADT. So it looks like there wasn't one for that road, but if there's one right next to it, that's where the 3747 is. So Scott Street is what's getting the 3,747 vehicles per day. One of the interesting things also is that they also break down how many of those are trucks by percentage. So you can take a look at if it's a main sort of shipping lane as well, because those vehicles aren't necessarily going to be stopping for a farmer's market. So it's an interesting way to think through this. But this is also, it's important to remember that this data is useful, but it also is a snapshot of the entire week, not necessarily during your market hours. So this may, I've happened to have gone to the Covington market a few times. It is sort of a major business district right there. So, their average daily traffic is probably higher on the weekdays than it is on the weekends. But this is a data point that you can kind of build off of. So it's useful to have. And you can kind of mess around. You'll see all of these are here, and all of these details are here, but you only need to pay attention to that first number. 4,374 is the average annual daily traffic here, and it was measured in 2017. So the rest is kind of not super useful for us. It's a lot more useful for people doing other work than that, but the daily traffic is really handy. So I highly recommend it. Some like the lane colors, I think, have to do with the type of road it is. So, you don't have to really worry about that either. Okay, so let's get back to the presentation. So, there's also a tool on there to measure area and distance as well. So that's sort of a double useful, but I find the Google Maps interface to be a little bit easier to manage. So I would use that if you're sort of intimidated by the amount of tools that are available on that data map. Okay, so other things to consider if you're moving from your existing location to a new location, you really want to consider and grade for how close to the previous location the new location will be. Realistically, the closer the better. It's not always possible, but if you can get sort of within the scope of what your existing customer base is, if you can get within the scope of their sort of existing radius of routine, that'll serve you well. And I have a couple of examples. They're a little bit more on the micro side, but I once moved a vendor as the winter it was a year-round market in California, and I moved the vendor from the end of the market, and so they were sort of an end cap to the market, and I moved them just sort of in the spirit of keeping the market compact and tight. I moved them off to the side and on one side of the lane. And I was talking to that vendor, they kind of protested, and I stuck to my guns, and had them moved. And then a few weeks later, I got a story from a customer who was super excited to see that this vendor was back in the market, but they never left. That customer just didn't notice that they were there for 3 weeks. They thought that they had just left. So it took a long time for that customer to kind of snap out of it and notice that that their routine didn't match what had happened in the market. So I think there's some insight to draw from that, which is that humans are habitual, and we need to make sure that we are not jostling some of those habits too hard if we're making a move that's going to be and making a necessary move. The other story I have, I switched the market hours from I had a market that landed on July 4th. It was a night market on Wednesday nights, and we switched the hours. We decided to switch the hours for July 4th to that morning. So we did a 9 to 1 market instead of a 4 to 8 market. I put up signs every 30 feet for 6 weeks prior that said, market is moving. The July 4th hours of the market will be 9 to 1. And I still got complaints from people who said that they didn't know and were really upset to find out that the market was in fact opened or wasn't open during those hours. So, these are just sort of anecdotes. They're not necessarily proof of sort of how far people are willing to travel, but they can sort of give you some insight into how hard it is to get people's attention sometimes. The next thing you want to consider as you're thinking about a new location is how close to your proximity to a retail core. And there are a couple of caveats that I really want to stress with this concept. Your core customers are not necessarily in a quote retail core. So, we've done markets in a shopping mall parking lot. But in my experience, people who are headed to the shopping mall are not in the frame of mind of going to a farmer's market. So, it doesn't necessarily match up. So I would try to, if you can, if your community has such an area, I would kind of look for things that are in closer proximity to independent businesses. If there's maybe a corridor of more and successful independent businesses, I'd try to stay closer to that. You're going to find customers that identify and are more interested in farmers markets in areas like that. Also, things to consider are your own market demographics, and you can really see those pretty well on Facebook. The insights, your page insights on your Facebook page will show you lots of information about the kind of people who like your page. Typically, the folks that are on Facebook, and I don't see any reason to think that this is different for people who actually attend markets, is typically around the 65 to 70% female. And so, another thing to keep in mind is where you're going to find that demographic. Where's their retail core, so to speak. So, think about that as you're looking through and grading potential locations. Another thing to potentially look for, if a retail if your retail core is not easily accessible for a location, you can also look at community landmarks, schools, parks, monuments, preferably ones that already have people attending. It's a useful thing to sort of look for. Next thing to consider is visibility. This is really basic. How much of the market can you see from a moving car, for example? Like you need the more opportunity you have to catch people's eyes, the better off the market will be. So, you know, that goes into the grades, and you need to think about budgetary demands for workarounds if that is something that that you know, if you find a market that's ideal in a lot of ways, but the visibility, or a space that's ideal in a lot of ways, but the visibility is not great, then you need to think about workarounds and what it'll cost to do that. So that's that. A couple other things. Impacts of the sun and wind on the market or on the potential location are super important as well. So available shelter, available shade, early morning, evening markets, you need to think about potentially lighting. So, you know, will customers most importantly need lighting if it's getting dark or if it's still dark before the market gets started? A couple other things I've seen, especially in larger cities, tall buildings have an impact on wind. So, you know, if you're going to be if your market space that you're considering is between a couple of taller buildings, say five stories or bigger, you're going to encounter some impressive wind gusts that are actually pretty dangerous when it comes to tents that are not weighed down. So you'll want to kind of think through that. It also creates other problems with regards to displays, all sorts of stuff like that. And the other place that I've seen really scary windy conditions are on hilltops. So keep those in mind when you're grading out. The next thing is longevity location. So let's see here. Let me get this. And what I mean by longevity is how long can you be there for before you may get bumped, or the potential for you getting bumped is a problem. The reality is farmers markets are often sort of first in, first out for new spaces. So developers, property owners, even municipalities will more than happily give farmers markets space to quote unquote activate an area, and then when that area is activated, they're all of a sudden the space, they'll need to move the space somewhere else. So you know, think about ways you can secure the location with a contract if possible. If there's going to be some sort of rent consideration, you'll need to think through that. And also, you know, especially with public property, do you need to have any plans in place, or will you get moved around for parades or fairs or anything like that? So, you know, those things go into the grades as well. Jacqueline Hodges asked me about workarounds for visibility. And what I mean by that mostly is a lot of signage. So, you know, how are you going to draw attention to people, let them know that there's a farmer's market behind that, behind all those trees? You need to kind of think through big signs, or, you know, have plans for ways to get attention, so that you don't just have that, you know, that 20 feet of visibility from the road of a car going 35 miles an hour to catch their attention. The next thing you want to think about is residential density. This one's actually really interesting. Um, in the report that's in the handouts, it talks about a quarter mile for daily trips as a formula. I think that is a little. I think that's a little small of a radius for most of Kentucky. I think that's, I just don't think we're dense enough for that. So I think that number is probably a little bit closer to a full mile for most people. But even that in more rural areas is sort of laughable. So um, I think it would be good to create your own formula for that, your own sort of um, what you think the minimum or the maximum radius for most people is for a quick jaunt to the farmer's market. Um, I think, and I think it would do you, it'd be very helpful for you to consider that in sort of harsh terms, like the laziest of the lazy, kind of how far is the laziest person you know going to go to get to the farmer's market? Um, the laziest person you know that likes going to the farmer's market will go to the farm. Like, how far will they go? um, so there's room for that. But there are a couple of tools here I want to show you um, with regards to that. So the first one is a pretty interesting. Um, this is a residential density of a location. So you can use this to kind of grade out a space as well. So this is the Covington address, the address of the Covington Farmers Market. And we'll just need to search it. And so you'll see that it's 10.42 households per acre, which isn't bad. That's a nice number. But you'll also notice that that's not without its sort of weird sort of the borders of this are kind of odd because you still have people who are considered in this density that are way over here by 71 and just 2 blocks away, not under consideration. So, it's still useful to kind of see what we're looking at in this area, especially. This is mostly residential, if I'm not mistaken. So, but you can do that for your own. You can do that for your own area, where you are now. It's a good way to, a really nice thing to do if you already have a market and you're thinking about moving is compare and contrast. So you can take what you have now and take this and grade it for what you could have if you move to location 1, 2, or 3. Let's see, let's go to the next. I was messing around with this one earlier today, and I'm not super thrilled with its utility for our use today, but it's more of a proof of concept than anything. But it's worth showing. Oops. Why aren't you? There we go. Okay. As this processes, you'll see that, let me just restart this. There we go. Okay, so you'll see that you can create, the smallest it goes is 1 mile. So you can create a 1 mile radius. As you can see, the problem with this is that I can't actually drag that pin up to where the market is, which is up here. But you can show reachable by public transport, and it'll take 30 minutes from these areas, and then also reachable by driving in 10 minutes, which is a nice tool. So all of these here, so anywhere inside the red, you can reach inside this, you can reach the center of this pin in 10 minutes, I believe. And let me see do we have anybody from Covington here today? Who we do? Megan, chime in, let me know if this is realistic. You can just send it in as a question, and we'll see how useful this piece is. Okay, so next piece. This other one is a similar radius map, which is also really useful. And we need to do there. Great. So you want to zoom in, click on a spot, and then you can. So there's the market, and up here you'll see that you have coordinates and the radius. So it's in metric first, and then standard second. And you can drag this second location. So you can use this pin drop here as sort of okay. So how far away is this desired area of town? The customers in that area of town that we want to get. You can see how far away they are. So you have a third of a mile of this folks that might be living over here, or maybe not the detention center. And you have half a mile to just across the bridge here. So this is ways that you can kind of build off of some of the other stuff that you can get, and there's still more that we can show. So a lot of this can kind of build off of each other. So there's a couple of things that are quite useful here. Okay, cool. Megan confirms that is reasonable, the map with the red. So this is reasonable to 10 minutes. So that's another great tool. We're gonna keep moving because we still have a lot to go over. Next thing is actually really awesome, but it takes a long time to load. So I'm just gonna drag it over here. This is an exceptionally useful tool. Census data. It is 10 years old, and the new data should be available next year, assuming that there aren't a frustrating amount of delays associated with some of the politics. So, but this, I've created a direct sales, a retail direct sales search, and then I did it for Covington, and then I clicked on this. You can break it down according to state, county, city, town, zip code, or even census tract. I think census tract is the more granular, more valuable piece of information. And then you can start with one variable. I found one on here, consumer expenditures per household on fruits and vegetables consumed at home. And then you can apply a filter to that, which is, say, the kind of customers you're looking for. So if you're looking for percent of customers that are 21 years and over, for example, you can filter for that, and then you can create a range, 97, 21, anywhere between 50% 21 and over to 91% 20 and over. Apply that filter, and it'll show you where those two things are where there's enough population for that. If you make the filters granular enough, they won't be shaded in. They'll just be white on the screen. They won't have any shade. But then if you can see down here, you have the scales on the right-hand side. Down here, you can see what people are budgeting for fruits and vegetables at home. So, if I were looking at setting up a new market, I'd also be willing to bet that some of these areas are quite nice. You probably want to get closer to some of these higher budgeted areas. And so some of this has to do with the fact that you are looking at, there's some socioeconomic stuff happening here as well. So it's important to kind of recognize that. So that it may not necessarily, some of this data may be useful to know, but may not necessarily affect your mission. If your mission is providing access to um, um, communities that are underserved, then this may not necessarily be a data point that you want to prioritize. But it is also really important to see what the reality is, see how many people you'll need. So like for every 2 to 4 people in the green area, you can get one person, or yeah, minimum one person that'll spend that much money in the blue area. So it's it's nice. It's important to see that, but also is important to recognize that this is not always the priority. All right, so that's the census data. There's some really useful things there. Definitely play around with it. There's a lot of great stuff on there, but it is also 10 years old, and it also um, is, takes some time to kind of figure it out. So these are just a couple of things that I think everyone should consider when they're looking at um, a new space. If you can avoid it, I really strongly recommend that you don't pay rent. Or if you're going to pay rent, see if you can make an arrangement for, um, a dollar lease, dollar a month or whatever, something through the city that you can, you know, prove the value of the community building value of your market. But paying rent is a really hard thing to pull off. And then, the general expectation for farmers in the state is that they don't want to pay a lot for their attendance at markets. So it's really hard to kind of both fundraise for rent and also have enough revenue to do other things like marketing or buy even infrastructure. So avoid it at all costs would be my strong recommendation. Some places might be worth looking into the differences in insurance costs. Some areas are going to be, you may look at insurance for a road closure may be higher than, say, in a parking lot, or or even definitely cheaper than, or more expensive than they would be if you're in a park, for example. And then also you want to consider infrastructure costs that would be associated with sort of mitigating any of the weaker parts of this new location. The things that I see that I think most markets could use more of is signage. More signage, more places. It takes time to put it out, all that stuff. I recognize that, but the way to get people's attention is through signage. And then also, the cost of things like road closure equipment. I think having a hand truck is also really nice. It's a nice luxury to have if you can include it in your budget, and also as a solution for markets where having one on hand, that is the market's hand truck, is a solution for having a location that is drop-off only, for example, where people can't leave their trucks behind them because there's not room for it, or there's some arrangement that you can't block the store frontage of the markets of the folks that the market is sort of in the street in front of. There's all sorts of reasons why you might need a hand truck, but that's worth thinking about as well. It is a solution that is much nicer if you have a nice hand truck. It's much easier to sell. And then also you want to consider things like fire access. Again, the fire truck going through the market, just to prove a point, is my anecdote there. So that's some of the resources that we've got and I have found and kind of played with today. But there are other resources out there. Chambers of Commerce for your area, business corridor associations and business development offices will have additional data that you can use to consider a new location. So I would sort of reach out to them, let them know what you're trying to do and what your some of the important things that you're looking for, If you have a decent idea of what your customer is, what your customer base is, that information is useful so they can give you data that can be catered to sort of what that customer behavior looks like in their areas. There is also a couple other funding partners. There are a lot of folks that have their eyes, especially within our program, that have their eyes on a permanent structure, and you can get funding for a permanent structure through the Kentucky Ag Development Board on a county level. Here is the, open it. Here's the application. These are the guidelines for farmers markets to apply for Ag Development Fund projects. And you'll see that one of them is new construction of a new farmers market facility. So they have funded that. They will continue to fund things like that. So it's worth going through that fund if you are interested in such things. But that's all. I have also included that in a handout as well. Let me pull up. Other things to consider. I've talked to a few markets that are looking for, sponsors, and I put that in quotes because you want to make sure that you're using the right language to make sure that they're supporting your market and not taking it over. That's really important to kind of have language in place to prevent that, in my opinion. But you want to have, there are people who want to spend the money for the recognition of supporting things like farmers markets. So think about healthcare companies, local banks, and municipalities as potential sponsors. And then lastly, there's the federal grant, the name of which is escaping me, but it formerly known as the FMPP and LFPP grant, has been lumped into a new grant through the Farm Bill that passed this year that is another source of funding for marketing. And you may not be able to, I don't think you can get a physical location or, things that will, I don't think you can get, I think it needs to be dedicated towards boosting sales. So if you can make that argument, you can maybe be able to use that grant. But I mention it only because I believe that it's possible. Couple of things that I want to just sort of, some truths that I want to just sort of say out loud. I've encountered a lot of places that when I managed markets in California, I had a lot of people who would call and say, we'd love to have a farmer's market in our church parking lot, our brand new condo development, our our brand new shopping center. They don't know anything about who your customers are or what your customers want, or even if they live nearby. All they're doing is trying to find ways to, quote, activate their area. So don't just get excited about it every offer. Do some of the legwork, take a look, see if it makes sense. I've seen that happen, and it's, I've experienced it, and it's an important thing to recognize. Along the same lines, everybody loves the idea of having a market on their property or nearby, but then when the reality's set, there's parking problems. People, all of a sudden, the businesses that were supportive feel like they're losing business because their parking spaces are being taken up, and they want new exceptions. So understanding that and recognizing it before it happens is important. And you want to have people all agree to any mitigating plans beforehand. Local politics are inevitable, so you do want to sort of work with, be a good partner with local politics. You want to be a good partner with local municipalities, and work within their system, get them the stuff that they need when they need it. And it's a really good, make sure that you have a good, strong relationship there. in the eyes, especially in the eyes of developers and municipalities, your permanence is not very high on the list of priorities. So if you can secure places through written contracts, I would do so, but also recognize that there's a possibility. Without that, the possibility of needing to move quickly is higher, and that's okay. Farmers markets are designed to be, by design, are lightweight and easy to kind of move around. It creates other problems, but it is sort of a characteristic of farmers markets, both the good and bad. We went over a lot of the data. It's not all available in the same place, but putting it together can make it really useful. And most importantly, no place is going to be the best. No place is going to fit every single thing that you want. Those places cost a lot of money, and that's where the rent is high there already. So the reality is we do have to, in a lot of sense, create the space that we need, and we do that through a lot of hard work, getting the word out, word of mouth, and making sure that people who go to the market are having a really special experience. But that being said, perfect is the enemy of the good. So don't worry about if your visibility is not. If all of your data says that this spot is better than the other three spots you're looking at, but the visibility is not great, don't overthink it. I mean, trust the data. You want to make sure that it is accurate data, but trust that what you're doing is you've done the process, you've done the work, and trust the process to be the best location. And lastly, don't worry. Miracles are hard to come by, so don't count on the most amazing things to happen, because they won't necessarily happen. So a couple of the tools. The report is also in your attachment, but it's also here on this website. That's the 68-page report that was done for Seattle, and that's really useful. But it's a long read. And then this page here is his score sheet that he created for this report. And then our toolkit, again, has a lot of this information in it. If you go to stage 1B, and you go down to choosing a market site, you'll see we have quite a few of these things locations are available as well. The census document, or sorry, the census webpage, the Kentucky Department of Transportation page, and the site selection tool. Or sorry, and this is the report that we've referred to a few times through Farmers Market Coalition. And then this site selection tool, I just want to show you really fast, if I can just get it to pop up. Okay. On page 49, here's a quick example of a site evaluation score sheet. So this will give you a helpful sort of structure for evaluating any potential new locations. So these multipliers are editable. I want to stress that. You can change these to anything you want, but basically what you want to do is give these a score, I think from 1 to 4 in importance. So super important is 4, kind of important is 3, not super important is 2, not really important at all is 1. So you can kind of mess around there, and then you're going to score each site according to these items between 1 and 10. and then you multiply that. So if it's a perfect 10, that gets 40 points for visibility for site A. Does that make sense? So I've created another version of that that's in the handouts below in your control panel. That's a similar version to that that's auto-calculated. So you just put in 10 here, and it'll show up as 40 here. And you can edit these. These are editable to the importance. I took a stab at some of the ones that I thought were more important than others. Apparently I think everything is super important. So mess around with it to see how you want to do, how you want to kind of prioritize, and you can kind of take a stab at some of these. And also, please add different rows as well if there are things that are more important or less important on here. And that's roughly it for the presentation. I hope there's some useful tools that you got that you may be able to use to kind of assess your own location, like considerations for a new location. But I wanted to just sort of show those to you and give you a chance to kind of make those tools useful for your own markets. The Farmers Market Support Program is more than happy to kind of participate with any work that you guys have in this regard. So if you would like additional sort of eyes and earballs, or eyes and ears, eyeballs and ears on the on your new location or your move, we're more than happy to be a part of that. So if there are any questions, please feel free to shoot them out now. I see Margie's mentioning that there's also one other grant that's called the GusNIP grant that I know is useful for potential. That's a federal grant. Is that, Margie? Can you help me figure this out? Is GusNIP what the FMPP is wrapped into now? I think it is. So anyway, if you guys have any questions about what I've got, anything that I've talked about today, or if there's anything that you'd like to run by the group, speak now. I'd love to hear from you. You can use the questions box as a place, or you can even raise your hand if you are interested in speaking and you have a microphone on your computer. So yeah, let me have them. Yeah, so GusNIP is what the FMPP and LFPP have been wrapped under. So it's a new name for the grant. Is for both the local food promotion program and the farmers market promotion program, are both under a new acronym called GusNIP, which is GUSNIP. Any comments, questions, concerns? Okay, well, I haven't seen anything come in, so I'll stay on for a little while, but I'm going to stop the recording. If you would like to work with us here at CFA, or if you'd like us to be a part of what you're doing with a potential move, we're more than happy to do so. Thanks for coming out to our webinar today. Really appreciate you taking the time to to sit with me, and I hope that um, you got some good use out of this webinar. Have a great day, and feel free to contact me by email or phone if you have any further questions. Cheers, everyone.